Hello, and welcome to today's Trainer Education webcast, How is Your Team Working? Hosted by HRDQ and presented by Melissa Caldwell. Before we begin, please note there is a question and answer button located at the top right-hand corner of your screen. You may use this button during the webcast to submit any questions you have. We'll either answer your questions as we receive them, during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation, or by email after the session. Today's webcast will last approximately 55 minutes, and it will include a brief Q&A with Melissa as time presents. Please stay tuned to the conclusion of the broadcast for an exclusive offer. My name is Sarah Montgomery, and I will moderate today's webcast. I am in business development for HRDQ, a publisher of research-based training solutions that improve the performance of individuals, teams, and organizations. Today's presenter is Melissa Caldwell, an expert in the fields of performance management, change and transition leadership, motivation, coaching, and communication. She has over 20 years' experience in designing and implementing innovative strategies and processes that measure, develop, and optimize people effectiveness. Her professional career includes high-level positions for Fortune 100 and large international companies. She received her Bachelor of Science degree in management from Purdue University, and she also graduated from the Ashridge Management College, an advanced management program in the United Kingdom. Welcome, and thank you for joining us today, Melissa.
Thanks so much, Sarah. I'm glad to be here again today. I know many of you were here with us yesterday, but due to technical difficulties, we've had to come back today, and that's great because some of you couldn't make it yesterday, so I'm very glad we could accommodate you to be here today. I tell you, we're going to talk about teams today, and I find teams so interesting. You know, on the one hand, they're very exciting, dynamic. You just never know what's going to happen when you get a group of people together that work closely together. But on the other hand, they're very predictable. There's been lots of research done around predictable areas that tend to trip up teams. And that's going to be our agenda today, basically, those 5 areas. Specifically, we're going to talk about the indications or symptoms that tells you your team is healthy. And on the flip side of that, what are some of those common blockages that get in the way of your effectiveness? What actions can you take to redirect your team, stop that draining of energy or distractions that might be getting in the way of your effectiveness? How do you maximize their productive efforts? And then I'm going to tell you, actually let you measure improvement over time. So before we go into all that, though, I kind of want to set the backstage. There was a study done on teams many years ago that is really powerful. And in this study, it was done on a university campus, where there were 60 groups of individuals, and these groups fell into one of 3 categories. There were business managers, much like yourself, there were college students, and then there were hospitalized neuropsychiatric patients. Of these 3 kind of groups, they split them into 30 groups on one side of the campus, 30 group on the other, and then they were trying to run a controlled setting where 30 groups, half of them, received 2 weeks of team training. Very deliberate skills around consensus decision-making, problem-solving, how do you deal with conflict, what about when change comes up, how do you deal with that, supportive climate, and what's the deal with the shared leadership. So 30 teams of business managers, college students, hospitalized neuropsychiatric patients. 30 of those teams received 2 weeks of team training. The other teams received nothing. All of the teams were then given a problem to solve that they had to do as a team. Shouldn't surprise anyone that the 30 groups that received team training actually outperformed those that did not receive team training. What was incredibly surprising was the trained, hospitalized neuropsychiatric patients outperformed the untrained business managers by a margin of 4 to 1. So think about that for a minute. Folks that were really having a hard time dealing with reality, coping with the world and other people at that point in time, when they were trained on how to function as a team, did better than us if we were untrained in team development. That kind of is sobering, if you ask me. So keep that in mind. And the second part of this setting the backdrop is how groups grow. I want to set this up. You've probably seen this before somewhere or another, maybe with these words, maybe a different word, but basically When groups come together, a lot of people think that, well, over time they'll get to know each other and they'll eventually function as a team, when in fact very few groups ever perform as a team. When they're coming together at first, there's two things going on. There's a task that needs to be done, or tasks, and there's people to get that task done. So in theory, when a group first comes together, they have no experience with this task, nor the interpersonal skills required to work with that group of people. This is our forming stage. This is where everyone is very polite to one another. This is where everyone's looking to the leader to be very directive in, why am I here, what is she here? Nobody really pushes back. You're very patient with one another. After time, you probably know that you get a little less patience, and your nerves are frayed a little bit once you see people's capabilities, their motivators, or lack thereof. This is our storming stage. This is where conflict comes out, and it is inevitable. It's what a group does with conflict that will allow it to become a norming group or totally self-destruct, refusing to deal with it and never leave the forming stage. The norming group is where you've now been together long enough that you kind of recognize there's differences in people, but you don't really use those differences. It's where we're getting work done, but, oh gosh, that's just Julie, ignore her, or that's just Ellen, you know, that's just the way she thinks, just work around her, don't let her know. You're kind of doing workarounds and probably working in cliques to get the work done. Norming does get work done, but again, it's not the most effective, most efficient. And a lot of this is because norming feels so much better than storming. A lot of people aren't willing to rock the boat. So conflict, again, which is inevitable, gets stifled, and no one deals with it, or at least they're not dealing with it in a healthy way. True high-performing teams, true groups that we can rightfully call a team, are those groups that push through that conflict, realize it is healthy, recognize differences among each other, not only recognize them, but utilize those differences to take the team to even higher places. Now, this, again, is the classroom forming, storming, norming, performing. Sometimes it doesn't happen so nicely. Another layer of this could be personalities, communication preferences. Again, you've probably worked with DISC, Myers-Briggs, social styles, insights. There are a number of them out there. But basically it comes down to there should be about 4 categories of communication preferences. Some of us prefer to deal in tasks. If I put an object on the table and ask you to describe it, if you're task-oriented, you are literally going to describe it in terms of the tasks it can perform. Other people have more interpersonal skill orientation, and they're the ones that basically, if I were to look at that same thing on the table, they're going to describe it in terms of who could make use of this object, who could be impacted and have value added from this object. So if you think about that, if a team is full of people who have nothing but task orientation, or a team that might be just having people orientation, they're going to fall off the spectrum of forming through performing, and if they're all task, they're going to head to that axis. If they're all people, we also have a name for these groups, and they're called dysfunctional, basically. So you absolutely have to have both task skills and people skills as you're going through. One or the other is not enough. If you have a whole group of tasks, then you've got to put on a skill set to get there otherwise. So again, all that is a backdrop to help you with the 5 areas that tend to trip teams up. And those 5 areas are the performance dimensions of mission values, or mission, vision, and goals, team roles, operating processes, interpersonal and inter-team relationships. So let's think about these briefly. Mission, vision, and goals. Most companies have a mission, have a vision. Some companies have individual goals. We're not referring to those. Does your team have a mission? Does your team have a visual of what their purpose is in the organization? Does everyone understand it? That's what that dimension is. Team roles, we're referring to, does everyone understand what the other person is up to? Do we understand where my job ends, yours picks up? And do we understand the gray area that is oftentimes there, so when it is kind of gray on whose role, who's responsible is this, we can actually talk through it in a healthy manner. Operating processes are those things that help you get work done. How do you do meetings? How are you going to deal with conflict? What happens if a change comes along? How do we reprioritize? Who makes the decisions? Interpersonal relationships usually gets talked about quite a bit because it's how people get along. The health of the relationship doesn't mean you all have to be best friends, but you certainly have to have trust and respect for one another. And then finally, inter-team relationships is another one that can trip teams up. It's how your team interacts with other teams in the organization. So what we're going to do to make this as proactive as possible and interactive as possible, we're going to launch a poll where I'm going to ask you a question from each of these 5 areas, just one, kind of get a poll of what the audience out there is feeling. So I want you to think about one particular team. In this day and age, there's a lot of teams that we're a part of, but one particular team as we ask these questions. I'm going to show you the question on a dark blue screen, just like we have now. But then when we launch the poll, your screen will go light blue. That's when you can actually interact. You'll see where it is to vote, and then we'll see what the group says. So on our first question, the first polling question, this will be, my team periodically reviews our progress towards our goal. So let's go ahead and launch that, Sarah, please. So when your screen goes light blue, there you go. You can go ahead and vote. My team periodically actually discusses the progress of our team goals. Is it always or never? And I'm seeing the votes are coming in. Let's give it a couple more seconds. All right. Let's go ahead and show those results. So we've got basically 59%. Sometimes. We talk about it sometimes. 17% always. Congratulations to you. That is phenomenal. 15% and 8%, the rarely and never. Again, it's something that doesn't get talked about. It's you know, when you're talking about feedback, it's hard as well. Let's go ahead and go back into our screens here. It's very hard to stop being reactionary in your day-to-day and actually be proactive about talking about this. I know that a lot of people have a hard enough time getting to the point where I'm talking about my own personal goals at the beginning of the year, and then I ignore it till HR says I have to do it in the middle of the year. We're not even talking about that here. We're talking about simple group feedback. Someone is probably doing it. Someone is planning and reprioritizing. Most effective groups, though, most effective groups that actually can perform as a team are doing that collaboratively. When things do change, they're revising the priorities together and coming to an agreement. Why is that so critical? People want to belong to something bigger than themselves. When they have that vision in that day-to-day work they're doing, that's going to offer it to them. The other thing is it encourages self-reliance. If everyone knows where they're trying to get to and what that vision and value add to the organization is, if a barrier or an obstacle comes in, it's going to help them make those decisions with that true north. It actually supports the good decision-making. And I think manufacturing plants, call centers, they're pretty good at this because there's some metrics that are pretty easy to identify. But support groups, IT groups, HR, marketing, a little bit harder. So I think you have to be very deliberate about it. Otherwise, there is going to be a lot of misunderstanding. Decisions might have to be remade. Planning is going to be very haphazard if it even exists. So here's an idea for you on mission, vision, and goals. Make it an agenda item. Every time your team gets together, either at the front of the meeting or the end of the meeting, make it a standard agenda item that allows you to talk about where are we, where do we need to go next, what's changed since we've been there last. Okay, so that's mission, vision, and goals. Let's go to our next poll question. Group members do not always appear to understand each other's roles. Go ahead and launch this one, please, Sarah. Group members do not always appear to understand each other's roles. Is that more true than false for you, or is it more false than true? The votes are coming in fast and furiously. Oh my, I'm not liking the results. A couple more seconds. Let's go ahead and launch those results. Wow. 72% of you have said that most often people don't understand each other's roles. Let's go back to my screens, please. And that's interesting. I'm glad that you actually confirmed it for me, because in my consulting, what I find is a lot of managers think this is happening with their team. Yet when I get into a team role or I'm interviewing team members, we're doing a team session, oftentimes this is the number one thing that gets in the way, that people really either don't really understand what that other person's doing or feel very misunderstood, that the group doesn't understand what they're up to. So, you know, when you're talking about team roles, do they know what they're supposed to do? Do they know where the handoffs are? You've lived this. If 72% of you are saying that's more true than false, you've lived this where things fall through the cracks or rework is necessary, or you do something that somebody else did and you stayed, you know, 4 hours late to get it done. That causes a lot of frustration, a lot of breakdown in trust. So here's an exercise I do quite a bit when I'm asked to do team sessions. You get subgroups together within the team, maybe by job description, or if it's sales and service, or order takers and customer service, whatever it may be. Give them each a flip chart piece of paper, and then tell them to work together as a like group on the following questions. What are your key roles? Just line them out. They may not even understand all of it. What's your value to the organization? Give them a chance to shine on that one. Here's the one I love. What are your top challenges and stressors? What are the things that absolutely make you pull your hair out every day in your role? And what do you want the other group to know? Okay, so key roles, value added, top challenges, what do you want the other group to know? So each group is doing this on their own. Then you have them share it. You report out and allow the other group to ask questions, react, respond. Truly an eye-opener many times, helps the manager see where the understanding is and isn't, and definitely is a team builder. So that's my idea for that one. Let's go to the next poll then. The third area that might trip people up is in the area of operating processes. I can't wait to see the score on this one. Go ahead and launch this one, Sarah. Group meetings are not productive. Group meetings are not productive. More true or more false? Yeah, that's what I was thinking. We've got about half of you voting. Some of you are thinking pretty hard on this. Wow. I know you can't see what I'm seeing. Let's go ahead and show those results. It's pretty split. That means progress is being made. I am so excited to see this. 51% of you said this is more true than false, that meetings are not productive, but 49% said more false than true. Let's go ahead and go back to my screens. That's encouraging to me because this has been a problem since the 80s. Group meetings obviously are only one operating process, but you know what a waste of time it is. There are so many companies that their whole days are going meeting to meeting to meeting, and then people tell me they have to stay after on the weekends and in the evenings to do their real work. Meetings are a chance to interact, get off the email, get off the IMing, and interact and debate healthy-like. But again, it's only one way that we're talking about with operating processes. Another is how are you going to make decisions? How are you going to deal with conflict when it comes up? What about change? The key here with operating processes as a place that gets you tripped up is the participation and collaboration. Everyone in the team needs to be involved in this. It really adds to a level of satisfaction, a feeling of responsibility, a commitment, that buy-in that's necessary, and the amount of frustration they're going to feel. Think about a car. Cars need their oil changed periodically. They need checkups to run efficiently, to stay on the road longer. Same thing with teams, yet we often don't take that time. So if you say you don't have time for that, we never have time up front to do it right, but we always have time in the back end to fix it. Do it up front. Here's an idea for this. In your team meetings, not every time, but maybe every 3 months, maybe every 6 months, do stop, start, continue. You may have done this somewhere along the line in another fashion or not. Maybe you're doing it with your teams. Have everybody think ahead of time, everyone in the team, come prepared to talk with some ideas around something the team needs to stop doing because it's not value added, something the team needs to start doing because it really would be helpful and add value, and something you're doing that you wish to continue. Great way for positive feedback. Stop, start, continue. Doesn't mean all the ideas are going to be taken, but it certainly gets the dialogue going. And this is what we're talking about with operating processes, that participation, collaboration. It enhances communication. The issues are addressed in a timely manner, and you can move forward. All right. Fourth group that could trip you up as a team is interpersonal relationships. Go ahead and launch this, please. Group members appreciate and capitalize on each other's differences, strengths, and unique capabilities. So that person across the team that drives you crazy, do you utilize their skills? Do you bounce ideas off of them? Always? Never? Some of you are really thinking about this one. So typically those people that are different from us bug us the most. That's a high-tech term. They bug us. But it's just because they think differently. They have something to add value to us. All right, most of the scores in. Let's go ahead and show our results. And what we've got here is 62%. A great majority of you say sometimes you capitalize on other strengths. So that's a lot of missed opportunity. If you're always doing it, 10% of you are doing it always. That's wonderful. You're probably a high-performing team. It feels good, doesn't it? Rarely is 24%. That's still pretty high. This is where the difference between norming and performing comes in. Let's go ahead and go back to the screens. Interpersonal relationships, you know, you'll always hear that. Team building, let's go out and play pizza and do some games and have a beer together. And for a while, team building really got a bad name around that. It's not just getting to know people personally, but it is knowing something about them so that when a comment is made out of context or overheard, you don't take it wrong. You know, well, they wouldn't say that about me because they've got my back. I know them well enough. Interpersonal relationships really are trusting, respectful relationships. Does not mean that you're best friends, but it understands that because someone is different, they have something to offer. Let's say I'm not a very detail-oriented person, and I need to go sell an idea to someone who is detail-oriented. I am going to look for somebody on my team that is anal with details so that they can look at my process, poke holes in it, ouch, that's going to hurt, but poke holes in it so that in a safe place I can make it even better proposal and then present it. I'm going to use those differences of my teammate to go make the team look better in the long run. So interpersonal relationships, very critical. Now here's my action idea for you on this. If there are cliques, if there is someone on your team you are not comfortable with, and you are not comfortable going up to them and discussing it, you need to get a coach. Find someone that can coach you through what's most concerning about interacting with that person. What's stopping you from going and approaching that person? What's the worst that could happen? What are you willing to do? Those are all open-ended coaching questions that will allow you to have a healthy conversation, reduce the conflict and the debate, the unhealthy debate, and move on. So if you've got someone out there, go address them. You will sleep better for it. Our last poll then, inter-team. This is your group with another group. Let's go ahead and launch that. Our team roles, relationships, and group structure are clear to other groups. So how well are you understood throughout the organization, basically? Do people know what you're up to? Do they respect you as a team? Do they not? Got some slow voting here. You're thinking hard. This is one, too, where as you're voting on this, a lot of people really know their business well, but when you kind of lift your head up out of your team to the rest of the organization, a lot of organizations have silos still, so that might be where our voting's reflecting. Let's go ahead and show the results. Most of you are in. A grand majority says 62%. Sometimes the other groups know what we're up to and we have good relationships. Sometimes. 29% rarely. That's kind of scary to me. So does the organization know who you are, know what you do, know where you add value? We really want them to understand this. It comes down to, does your team, the members of your team have collaboration skills? You know, every day you're negotiating for something to get a work product out faster, to get something turned around, to get approval, to get a vendor to deliver something. In fact, when you're trying to work with those other groups, a lot of times it feels like your goals are at odds with their goals. So you personally have to have good collaboration skills to negotiate a win-win conversation. I have a need that needs to be met. You have a need as well. You know, it's so funny around collaboration because as kids, we're taught to compete. Think about it. Age 4 or 5, we're put on a T-ball team, and we're taught how to win against the other team, even though everybody still gets a trophy these days. In grade school, you're trying out for different teams. In middle school, you may be competing for the first chair in band. In high school, you're competing to be on varsity versus JV. In college, you're competing for that, to get that offer letter from college. In the work world, you're competing for, wow, there's 500 applicants for this one job. You're competing, and then all of a sudden you get on the job and they say, okay, play nice now. Collaborate. It's a skill set that may not come naturally for us, especially here in North America. So you need to learn how to collaborate. Another couple things on where teams with other teams get tripped up, time orientation. I ask this other team, I need it as soon as possible. How I define as soon as possible might be very different than how they define it. Goal orientation. My goal seems at odds with theirs. We already talked about that. Interpersonal. Maybe my team is a very task-oriented team. Their team is a very people-oriented team, so we speak different languages. And finally, maybe we're very formal and disciplined, where the other team is kind of innovative and creative and out there. So you really need to learn how to collaborate, how to carefully negotiate for each of those things. Here's my action idea for you on inter-team relationships. Get a champion. Typically, this is the official leader of the group that acts as a PR person within the firm. If that person is unwilling or unable to do it, though, anyone on the team, sell yourself to the rest of the organization. Don't assume they know what you're up to. Advertise your successes. Communicate, have lunches with people in other areas to build the relationships. You will be much better off for it. Okay, so inter-team, one more thing, relationship between the team, the other departments, it's healthy, win-win. Basically, I just kind of went through all that. So we've done one question in each of these 5 areas. Basically, what I've been doing is drawing from an assessment called the Team Effectiveness Profile. It has 49 questions that fall into these 5 categories. So there's 9 or 10 questions for each of these 5 dimensions. I got to tell you, I have been using the Team Effectiveness Profile since the 1980s, and yes, that dates me, but it's that powerful. When you've got any kind of conflict or strife or just, ineffectiveness in a group, a lot of times people aren't very comfortable with it. What the TEP allows is data generating. Then you've got something very objective to talk about. It can actually be filled out totally anonymously, and let me show you what you get with it. There's 2 ways that you're looking at your scores. If you see a figure 2 and a figure 3 here on the screen. If you look at the top figure, figure 2, when you take your scores, you can compare your overall score with the team score. This is very important for managers that may not have a realistic view of what's going on in the team really. Or maybe it's just a team member that's having a very different experience than the rest of the team, because that lowest score is really where the team is. If you look at the 5 areas, if it's on the very far left, you're an immature group. That coincides with the forming stage of group development, where you're just coming in, you're not getting a lot done, you're looking to the leader for every answer and every problem solved. Fragmented, if you fall within that area, that really coincides with the storming stage. Lots of conflict. You do not want to be there. Now, if you're a new team, you'll probably fall in the immature. That's okay. You'll know what to focus on. If you've been around for a while and you're in the immature and fragmented, you definitely need to get some help. Cohesive and slightly into the effective category there really aligns itself with norming. You're getting the work done, maybe not as most effective as you could, and certainly not as fun and satisfying as it should be. Synergistic is where you want to target. That's going to be a truly high-performing team. So in this case, we've got, if your score is cohesive, team score is slightly lower than that, barely off of the conflict. I would want to know, well, great, where do we start? What do we do with this? That's what figure 3 is. You'll see across the top in that bottom graph there are 5 areas: mission, vision, and goals, team roles, etc. You'll also see that individual scores for those 5 areas will fall in a range from very ineffective all the way up to very effective. Here also you compare your score, your perception, to what the rest of the team is doing. And you can run this with an average, or if you're in a high trust group, you can look at everyone's score. It's up to you totally. So this one is telling me that the whole team has some issues. We have some things to talk about because nothing is above the somewhat ineffective, effective age or grouping. If I had to pick one or two things to prioritize, I would probably start with team roles and inter-team relationships. And really those are kind of related in this case because, you know, not understanding what everyone's up to. But again, this TEP lets you generate data and then helps you prioritize, even going back to the 9 or 10 questions. If I'm looking at this bottom one and the dotted line in mission, vision, and goals is very, you know, it's in the very dead center of the ineffective, I can pull out the questions and talk about them one by one in a group meeting and start to unblock those things. Very powerful stuff. So where do you go from here? Well, I want you to really think carefully and start to ask yourself, how would you rate your group's effectiveness in each of those 5 areas? You know, as you pull each one, mission and vision, all the way to inter-team relationships, would you consider yourself very effective, very ineffective? And depending on where you are, what evidence do you have to back that up? What tells you you're effective or ineffective? You might find you change your answer. More importantly than that, try to put yourself in other team members' shoes. Would they think about it differently than I would? That's something you want to discuss. And then with that, what immediate steps can I take to address some of those blockages? Lots and lots of stuff to talk about. Now, we have been collecting questions along the way, so I want to turn it back to Sarah for a moment. She has been collecting those questions and see what's on your mind.
Great. Thank you so much, Melissa. Feel free to continue to send in your questions. I have a few that have come in throughout the presentation, but feel free to go ahead and send those in. If we don't get a chance to answer them today, we will certainly answer those by email directly. So our first question comes in from Monica, and Monica asks, where do you start to make things better when a team is totally dysfunctional in all 5 areas?
Where do we start? Oh my gosh. First thing to start is to gather as a team and start talking about it. Very uncomfortable if it truly is highly dysfunctional. You may wish to use an outside objective facilitator to help make that a safer environment, but you don't have to. Just having a conversation is what's important. A lot of times when I work with very dysfunctional teams, I will give them exercises to start the day out that's not related to work at all, but will give them some group dynamics to discuss that are very similar to what they've seen back on the workplace. That will give them examples to talk about that are not, you know, people aren't as vested and have so much commitment in it because it's not personal at that point. Then at the end of the day, I'll throw out some type of assessment, either this TEP or another assessment to give them some data to further those conversations. So the best short answer, where to start, just start somewhere.
And our next question is from Ginger. It talks about what about remote teams when they can't necessarily travel to meet together?
Very difficult. That is a whole other level of complexity. Hopefully you're not doing a lot of meetings by just texting the written word, not texting, but emailing or even conference where you're chatting online, but you've got voice to voice in those conference calls. You know, it's very important to remember that words only carry 7% of the message when you are face-to-face, only 13% of the message when you're over the phone and you don't have body language to look at. Same principles apply, though. You need to be generating data to make it safer for people to talk about. I wouldn't change anything other than the complexity of talking voice-to-voice versus face-to-face, and all of these same principles apply.
Great, thank you. And our next question here from Matthew, I'm going to try and summarize a little bit. What do you do when you have a manager that dictates how everything will be done versus allowing the team to grow in a shared leadership? Yeah,
kind of micromanaged. Not a good thing. Feedback. Short answer, someone has got to be brave enough to give that individual feedback, and let me give you a little guideline for that. You may have heard of I statements. Giving feedback to someone about how their actions are impacting me or I. So if my manager is doing all the decision making and just kind of dictating what happens, I may follow a team meeting where he or she has shouted out these things and said something like, you know, when decisions are all made from your office, it makes me feel like my opinion is not valued, and then just remain quiet. Very hard for that person to argue, oh, you don't feel non-valued, because yes, I do. And you don't, with I statements, you need to be very careful not to say, you're doing this wrong, you're messing up. But when the decision comes from one person in the department, I feel like my opinion's not mattered. It's not valued. Feedback, feedback, feedback. Everybody hates it, but you got to do it.
Great. And from Linda here, we have a question about where do you see teams faltering most often?
Oh, I get that question asked a lot because everybody wants a quick fix. And initially, you know, when I answer this, it's so funny because I'll say, oh, roles, absolutely. People don't understand anything, and then that leads me to goals. They don't understand each other because they don't know what they're trying to do. And then it's all 5 areas. It really varies by the functionality, the complexity of the team, the industry you're in, how fast-paced it might be, but it truly does come down to these 5 areas. And you may have read Patrick Lencioni or, you know, the 5 dysfunctions of the team. He uses different words, but they're all subsets. When people don't understand what their value is, their vision, and what value added to the organization, their purpose, they don't have a compass at all. When they don't understand the roles they play within that, misworked, missed opportunities, duplication of work, rework. When they don't understand how they're going to do the work, those operating processes encompassing both task skills and the interpersonal skills, communication breaks down. And then that brings us to the relationship parts of the interpersonal and inter-team. It really is all 5.
Great. And our last question here from Samantha, she asks, how do you build a team with a supervisor that has very little to do with the team?
Well, shared leadership will come quite in handy there. Hopefully, if the leader has little to do with the team, he or she is also not blocking the team in getting work done. In that case, someone will typically rise to the occasion in an unofficial leader role, but a highly effective team truly does have shared leadership depending on what the circumstance, what the task presents itself. Do we need somebody who's an expert? Do we need somebody who has relationships with a different department at this point? And again, it comes back to talking about these things instead of just doing them one-off of 2 or 3 people kind of being a clique. You know, getting together, hey, we don't have an official leader here. Here's the situation. Who's the best person to do this? Up front, that's going to take a little bit more dialogue. After a while, though, when you truly understand what people's strengths are, their capabilities, what motivates them, what really, you know, gets them jazzed, it's almost seamless, and people do it automatically.
Great. And you know what? Just 2 more questions came in, so we do have time. I'm going to go ahead and ask those.
Okay.
So, Melissa, let me see if I can paraphrase this one for you a little bit. This is from Leah, and Leah's talking about when 2 different teams are merged together into one or more teams. There seems to be, you know, more control in one team versus another, and sometimes frustration can happen. Can you kind of talk around when teams kind of have to merge together and how they can best manage through that?
Absolutely. When 2 teams are merging together, that's the most complex it can be. However, even if one person is changed out in the team, the entire team dynamics changes. So in that group growth of forming, storming, norming, performing, the teams, whether it's, you know, a new player or 2 teams coming together, you automatically go back to the beginning, forming. Now, when you're looking at that, there are several things a leader can do to speed up the process to get you back to 2 high-performing teams as one, or not do that will keep you kind of stagnated in the middle. But if you're thinking about it, you've got forming and storming and norming, performing. The first two stages really need someone to step up and direct getting to know each other, understanding the task, understanding that role piece of what does each team do in light of the new shared goals, mission, and vision that you now have. As the team starts to progress, that shared leadership is going to rise up. So I think with the initial question that one team is a bit more strong than the other, very critical to do some sort of kickoff work in the form of a facilitated meeting or what have you, where the group can really not just get to know each other, but understand concerns, understand special competencies within each, and then truly talk about those operating processes. How will we work from here on out? And every single team member needs to be able to give feedback freely where they feel it's a safe environment. That's part of a supportive climate, where if it's not happening, they can say, hey, when this team makes the decision for the whole group, this is the impact it has on me and my ability to get my work done. Hopefully that helps.
Great. And our last question comes from David. When the leader of a team is also the superstar performer, how do you encourage them to allow others to shine?
Yeah, that comes up a lot as well, because everybody is a working manager, a working supervisor these days, and it really does come down to making a shift from being one of the team to being a member of the team. You're talking leadership skills, you're talking transitional skills, your motivators, and those things that satisfy you as an individual contributor or a superstar are very different than those things that motivate you and satisfy you, build your self-esteem as a supervisor or leader of a team. So this person is probably still being asked to deliver and is a superstar, but needs to add the skills of developing others as well. Maybe he or she has never been told that's an expectation. Maybe their boss is not setting the expectation that, hey, besides being our superstar, I need you to grow the capacity of the team around you. If that's the case, then again, the team members need to come forth, be brave, be courageous, and give that feedback of, you know, wow, I really admire how you do this. I would love to be able to learn that myself. Can you help me?
Great. Thank you so much. And thank you, everyone, for sending in your questions. These are great questions. I can see a few more are still coming in. So keep sending them in, and we will absolutely, Melissa will respond to those directly by email. You'll receive those. So go ahead and keep sending in those questions. But thank you so much for your time today. And as an exclusive offer, you do receive 20% off any team effectiveness profile. You can get that at our website, HRDQ.com. And you do want to use the coupon code LCEL Webcast, all together, one word. I'm sorry, that's TEP Webcast, one word, at the website, and you'll be able to get that discount for you. We do appreciate your time, and we hope you found your webcast today very informative. Thank you so much, Melissa.
Thank you.